will say the wrong thing. For anyone
Yeah.
who's supporting a griever, just know you're going to mess up, but
Yeah.
that's okay. It does not matter exactly what you say as much as it matters that you keep trying to be there, keep trying to show up.
Oh my goodness, Rio, welcome to the Stop Faking Fine podcast.
Thank you. I'm so glad to be here.
I am so excited to unpack all the things supporting people grieving, those of us grieving, helping those that are grieving. When I saw that you were on a mission to help those who feel stuck and powerless in the aftermath of tragedy to find their way to a new version of themselves with radical compassion and unapologetic clarity, I was like, sign me up. Let's go. So how can you back up? Let's take this back a handful of years. And what brought you to a place where now you're on a mission to help others grieve?
Yeah. Yeah. So it really started with my own journey, of course, as so much of what we care about does. It starts with our own, what the hell is happening here? And so I was already a practicing therapist and thought I had, all of the tools. I had worked, not heavily or so specifically, but of course I'd had clients who have experienced loss. And then my dad got sick and I became one of his primary caregivers as he died. And then he died. And my entire world was absolutely turned upside down, of course. In addition, I realized very quickly that I had no idea what grief was actually like. And I had no idea what a massive trauma it is to our entire being and how much it changes and those ripple effects that 3 years later I am still navigating and still figuring it out. But there's a real lack of knowledge and I, being a therapist, I didn't even really know where to find the knowledge or where to go. It was out there for sure, but it was clear that I had had so little exposure to it and was not prepared or equipped. And then the more I got into my own research and, was really doing that deeper dive into my own experience and my own anger, and I feel like a different human. My life doesn't look the same. How do people do this? The more I really was investigating all of that for myself, the more I realized that it's not talked about that much.
There's a need.
There's such a need. And everyone's flailing.
Everyone's flailing. Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
First of all, I am so sorry for your loss.
Thank you.
I am also so proud of you for me for taking the tragedy and really wanting to help the woman behind us, the woman that's coming up, because there is a need. When my husband died, I had no idea. I was like, okay, all of the widows that I knew were far more seasoned, with grown children. My children were 6, 8, and 10, and I didn't have the resources. And I love that you share, like you touched on it a little bit, and I would love to touch on, like, dive a little bit deeper to the anger where pre-loss, I know that you've shared in other places, you were easygoing and, you could go you could roll with the punches and everything was, not great, but good enough and you could navigate. But post-loss, everything makes you mad.
Yeah. Yeah.
So can you share more about that?
Yeah, of course. I mean, this is one of my favorite things to talk about because this was the most surprising part of my own response to loss. I think it confused some people in my life. It certainly I confused myself. And the more that I talk about it and the more that I've been talking with others about it, the more you realize everyone's mad. Like everyone, it's the massive sense of injustice that someone has been ripped out of your life without your consent. And now forevermore, you have to deal with the ripple effects and the secondary losses. I mean, anger is protective. Anger is a beautiful, actually a beautiful response to something happening to you that feels threatening and scary. And so really, a lot of my journey has been finding ways to befriend that anger and say, Like, thank you so much for wanting to protect me. I see you, and that's valid. It's valid to feel that way. And
Yeah.
our relationships feel prickly. People are saying the wrong things. We are so exposed and so vulnerable that, of course, the protective parts of us, the guards, are going to step
Mhm.
forward and say, I need to keep more harm from happening here.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
you have shared that you're not an angry person, but you're
Mm-mm.
someone that's hurting and you're
Mm-hmm.
feeling that emotion of anger.
Yeah.
And I know that I'm not the only one that feels that deeply. Like I feel
Mm-hmm.
that so deeply
Mm-hmm.
because I did when my husband died, I didn't have the tools and strategies to deal with
Mm-hmm.
that trauma on that level. And
Mm-hmm.
so every little thing would make me angry.
Yeah.
And I was
Yeah.
turning into someone that I didn't like. I was like,
Mhm.
I am frustrated with just about everything. I have no
Yep.
patience. I have
Yeah.
no my fuse lights off so
Mhm.
quickly.
Mhm.
So for the woman listening, how do you help? Like what are the strategies that you would encourage us to lean into
Mhm.
to, I mean, obviously recognize, like, and it's not
Mhm.
even obviously, it's like step one,
Yeah.
recognize,
Yeah.
recognize. And I love that you use the word honor, honor
Mhm.
that anger.
Mhm.
Thank you for showing up to protect me. But
Mhm.
what do you do next
Yeah.
in that moment?
Yeah. So I think right, recognizing, is it irritability? Do I just feel on edge? Am I snapping at people? Or am I very clear that I'm just feeling rage? It's
Yeah.
like a whole spectrum that anger can show up and be confusing and start to feel like it's taking over our day to day or our relationships or sense of self. And so recognizing it is huge. Step one. Step two, I would say start to build a relationship with this part of you. And
Hmm.
so really seek curiosity and not clarity. And so I think so much of our natural instincts as human beings, not mammals, but human beings, with
Yeah.
all of the intellectualizing and the analyzing, is to go straight to the, why am I feeling this way? It doesn't make sense to feel this way. Why am I snapping at this person that I love? Why am I such an angry person now? And we're trying to make sense with cognitive language and thoughts
Mhm.
when what's happening has no language. Our body is responding. And so the more that we can look at that part of ourselves, recognize it, and say, okay, what is this telling me right now? What is this anger in this moment telling me that I need? What is it trying to protect me from?
Mhm.
And when we start learning how to have a conversation with it and have a relationship with it, I think
Yeah.
so much of the time we can start to uncover these pieces of awareness, such as, oh, this person didn't text me back. Why am I so upset about that? And saying, okay, what is it that I need? I need to be reassured that they're not going to leave me too.
Yeah.
Or I need
That's
to
so
be,
good though, to
mm-hmm,
be reassured when that person
mm-hmm,
doesn't text you back.
yeah, yeah,
Thinking through those moments because
mm-hmm,
the awareness in those moments sometimes we don't have because we're
mm-hmm,
grieving, we're
mm-hmm,
frustrated, we texted
mm-hmm,
you, you didn't show up,
mm-hmm,
and it's fear,
yeah,
right? That's
yeah,
underlying.
mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
How do you work through that?
I mean, I think what you said is just so important, that yes, I'm feeling this anger in this moment, but what's underneath that is fear. So anger
Mhm.
is protecting us from fear, from pain. And so I think in those moments, we say, okay, where do I have safety in my life?
Yeah.
If I am afraid, if this relationship feels unstable, um, if my if my capacity is stretched way too thin and I am overly responsible for all of the things while I'm also trying to grieve, and I have a lot of anger around that, we say, okay, where is safety within yourself and also within your relationships? And so in my work, that's where a lot of the conversation around nervous system and the body comes in, and also how to have boundaries and ask for what you need with others.
Well, I mean, let's jump into all of that because you're talking and you're like so casually saying, well, just assess where that is. And then create a boundary, duh, create a
Mhm.
boundary. But that is
Not that
so
easy.
much
No.
easier said than
Mhm.
done. And I
Mhm.
only have my experience to lean back on, right? And I can think
Mhm.
of the woman I was 11 years ago when my husband died, and I was
Mhm.
exactly that, juggling all of the
Mhm.
things,
Mhm.
responsible for more than I had the capacity, not the
Mhm.
ability, but the mental
Mhm.
capacity to really
Mhm.
handle. And anger was a huge thing. Like
Mhm.
I didn't have the bandwidth. And so I would
Mhm.
snap at things that previously I wouldn't have.
Mhm.
And I didn't know how to create those boundaries. I definitely felt hurt in a lot of relationships where,
Mhm.
whether it was a text or a phone call or a whatnot, but you didn't show up.
Mhm.
And it was really, the context of the situation was probably really nothing big. Like it's no big
Mhm.
deal to anyone
Mhm.
else. But I
Mhm.
think because of the fear that I stuffed down so deep to
Mhm.
say,
Mhm.
well, I can do this. I mean, this podcast is called Stop Faking Fine because I learned to
Mhm.
stuff that way
Mhm.
down deep.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
help us understand, what is that next step. So once you recognize that you're angry or you're fearful and you need to create boundaries, how would you coach us through that?
I think when we're talking about boundaries, I think of it in two pieces. So what are your internal boundaries around?
Mhm.
Like where are your lines? How are you talking to yourself? How are you showing up for yourself? How are you allowing yourself to rest? So what are those boundaries within yourself? What are those agreements and permissions?
Mhm.
Um, or protections that you are intentionally and actively deciding, this is what I need, this is good for me, that is going to give you so much clarity within other relationships and in your external environment about what is acceptable for me to allow in. Is this person not aligning with something that I've agreed with myself is what I need right now? And maybe that's permission to feel, maybe that is space to be authentic. And so if this person over here, I am feeling that pressure to show up in a certain way that doesn't bum
Mhm.
them out or,
Mhm.
doesn't burden them in some way,
Yeah.
maybe that's a person that right now I have an energetic boundary around. And boundaries don't have to be these big, scary conversations where you tell someone, like, you're not good for me. Here's my boundary. We're not speaking anymore. It can simply be, that's not my go-to person in this season of my
Yeah.
life. That might not always be true, but for right now,
I think
yeah.
that that is so good because there are people that come into our lives,
Mhm.
and a lot of them for a season, and they're
Mhm.
not intended to be our best friend
Mhm.
forever. But
Mhm.
understanding that boundary, and yes, not calling them up to say, "Hi, I've decided that
Mhm.
you're not good for me, and
Mhm.
so you're not going to hear from me for the next few
Mhm.
days." But just recognizing, having the
Mhm.
self-awareness to recognize that you can move forward, which I think is also really hard when we're
Mhm.
grieving, to simultaneously grieve and give
Mhm.
yourself the space to honor the past
Mhm.
while giving yourself the space to live forward.
Mhm. Mhm.
And I think part of that with the boundaries is you're used to something. You have a life and repetitions and routines that you do on a
Mhm.
daily basis. And so all of a sudden, some of those things are not fitting.
Mhm.
And we get torn, I think, between grieving and holding on to the past
Mhm.
and doing the things that you actually need to do to move forward, because sometimes it feels selfish to get to that
Mhm.
place.
Mhm. Of moving forward.
Yeah. What
Yeah,
do
I
you like?
think
What are your thoughts
mhm.
on that?
I think that, guilt is a whole conversation and grief of we could do a whole separate podcast on guilt.
Well, let's dive in a little bit. Like guilt is huge. And I think a
Yeah.
lot of us are people pleasing
Mhm.
women that
Mhm.
want for everyone. At the end of the day, we all want the accolades of saying, "Oh, you did a great job. Oh,
Mhm.
you did a great job."
Mhm.
And so in grieving, there's no rule book. And
Yeah.
so all of a sudden you're thrown into this life where you didn't expect to not have this person with you. And you're fumbling.
Mhm. I think that, something I say to many of my clients is that when it comes to guilt and moving forward, we self-compassion is, I know, such an overused term, and some I'll say that to some people and they just like roll their
Roll their
eyes. They're
eyes.
like, "Yeah, yeah, yeah, I should be nicer to myself. I get it." Um, but really, moving forward means we are integrating grief. It
Yeah,
doesn't mean that we are leaving it behind us. It doesn't mean that we are actively, intentionally creating distance from our person. It
yeah.
means we are learning how to carry both grief and being alive in this world.
Mhm,
And we will ping pong between feeling and rebuilding. And we can't stay over here in the deep feeling, the grief, the emotion for too long. Our bodies quite literally can't take that processing
mhm,
continuously. So we will naturally then move into rebuilding. We're going to work, we're making the appointments, we're taking care of our kids. And so
mhm.
I think we so naturally want to make ourselves wrong for being in one space or the other for too long or at an inconvenient time.
I mean,
But to your
let's talk
point,
about that at
mhm,
an inconvenient
mhm,
time. Like
yes, yeah. Well, I mean, I think you made such a good point about the people pleasers, and I don't think you used this word, but people pleasing and perfectionism is something I
yeah,
work a lot with. And
yeah,
what I'll offer sometimes is, look, this is probably the first time in your life that you have had no choice but to put yourself first. Your
yeah,
body is not giving you a choice here.
yeah.
And that can be incredibly wildly uncomfortable for so many people, especially women who are the caregivers and the caretakers and the overly responsible ones. And so it's going to feel probably wrong and selfish, but it doesn't mean that that's true or that that is
Mhm.
what's happening. It's necessary to say, I can only remove things from my plate to give myself more space. That
Yeah,
is all that I have control over right
yeah.
now.
That is so
Yeah.
hard to do in
Mhm.
or can be really hard to
Yeah.
do in real life. I remember,
Mhm.
like, in the years after my husband died, I would say, "Oh, sure, yes. Oh, you guys are going to dinner? I would love to go to dinner. I'll be there." And I was the
Mhm.
queen of just not showing up because
Mhm.
I would get to that place
Yeah.
and I would have loved to have had the mental energy to
Yeah.
show up and do a lot of things, but I was spent and I didn't know how to really I didn't really understand it in the moment myself.
Mhm.
And I didn't
Mhm.
really recognize the fancy word of saying, I'm putting myself first or I didn't
Mhm.
organize my thoughts, right?
Mhm.
I
Mhm.
just was in survival mode. And
Mhm.
so for the woman that is in that space saying, I don't have time to prioritize
Mhm.
myself. Like I
Mhm.
am on, I have a job, I need to put food on the table. I have,
Mhm.
a number of children, I have this, that, the other
Mhm.
thing, and I can't
Mhm.
prioritize myself.
Mhm.
Like what can you share with
Mhm.
her?
Yeah, I think there are so many ways to take care of ourselves that can look like so many different things. And so do you have 5 minutes in the morning when you can just place a hand on your heart and your belly and take deep breaths and just say, in this moment, I am safe. In this
Yeah.
moment, my kids are safe. You know, does that feel nourishing? Is that a way you can start the day, just being with your body and with your experience and in this moment? Or can someone um, have groceries, like a grocery delivery service? Can you do that once a week so you just don't have to leave the house? So
Mhm.
I think there are a lot of creative ways that we can carve out space, because you're absolutely right. There are just non-negotiables, like, especially when you have kids. It's
Mhm.
the world does not stop, and there are so many commitments and so many things to do and get done. Sometimes it's really helpful to just write out on a piece of paper and see it physically in front of you. Here's everything I'm responsible for every single day.
Mhm.
What can I delegate? And then what can I remove? And what do I have to keep? And let's say you have to keep all of it. Okay, where can I call in help to help me with some of
Yeah.
this?
Yeah.
Um, where can I create some white space? Where, if I don't have white space, how can I bookend all of these stressful transitions in my day with breathing or with some sort of mantra? What can ground me in
Mhm.
small, very tangible moments? I think
Do you
that's where I
have
would start.
suggestions on when you talk about grounding and
Mhm.
mantras? Like, what are
Mhm.
your, you've already mentioned if you put your hand on your heart and you put your hand on your belly and you
Mhm.
say to yourself, I am
Mhm.
safe.
Mhm.
Like, what
Mhm.
other suggestions that are really kind of quick and easy
Mhm.
that we can
Mhm.
do even when you're sitting in the carpool line and you're
Mhm.
there late and you're last
Mhm.
and now you realize
Mhm.
it's going to take 30 minutes instead of 10 and
Mhm.
your cortisol is going through the roof because everything
Mhm.
is not happening
Mhm.
properly.
Mhm.
What can we
Mhm.
do in that moment?
So that's where a lot of the nervous system work that I do with clients comes in, because in those moments we can cognitively know I'm not in danger, but as you spoke to, my system is activated. And
Mhm.
now my logic brain isn't fully functioning because I'm heightened and I'm stressed and I'm
Yeah.
in my fight or flight. So anger and that kind of buzzy up energy, as I call
Mhm.
it sometimes, some of my favorite quick tools is, okay, first start with acknowledging that anger, like, oh, I am stressed, I'm late. Oh my gosh, we're going to be late for this thing. Notice where that anger is in your body, and as you focus on that feeling, like push on the steering wheel or press into something, or, take a towel and wring it and pull it, And so this is where we start talking about how do we mobilize that energy so we're
Mhm.
not getting stuck around it in our nervous systems. So that's part of the work,
Yeah.
is learning how to identify, move, and then you do, a quick grounding, but not making that energy wrong, not making the anxiety or the
Yeah.
anger wrong, but how do I just let my body process it and just acknowledge this is here right now. It's okay. I don't need to suppress it, but how do
Yeah.
I give it space so that I'm not holding on to it for the next 5 hours?
Yeah, because in this
Mm-hmm.
situation, and I can put myself right in it, where
Mm-hmm.
you've been running on adrenaline because you're going
Mm-hmm.
from the one responsibility to the next responsibility to the next responsibility
Mm-hmm.
to the kids pickup line. And I think it's just
Mm-hmm.
a great visual for,
Mm-hmm.
you're there late, the line is wrapped around the school and down the block and everywhere else. You're already don't have a snack for, your child in order to
Mm-hmm.
drop them off at soccer, and you're feeling yourself get anxious.
Mm-hmm.
And our natural reaction then when the car door opens, rather than greeting everyone with a smile and a hug, you're like, oh my gosh, hurry up, hurry up, hurry up. We're
Yeah.
late, we're late, we're late.
Mm-hmm.
Buckle
Mm-hmm.
up, like throwing
Mm-hmm.
them snacks, and
Yeah.
like pedal to the metal, you're on to the next
Mm-hmm.
thing. So I just want to reiterate this. So in that moment,
Mm-hmm.
like, I have tools and strategies. I would say, pop a kid's mood and calm your nervous system with a
Mm-hmm.
supplement that allows
Mm-hmm.
your body to get out of fight or flight.
Yeah.
But in addition to that, or
Mm-hmm.
as something, a different tool that you could
Mm-hmm.
use is,
Mm-hmm.
I'm literally visualizing myself like just gripping the
Yeah.
steering wheel
Mm-hmm.
and saying, okay, I'm going to release that energy here.
Yeah. Big breath in. I'm so pissed or I'm so angry, and blow out and just grab that steering wheel as hard as you can.
Yeah.
Do
Is there
that
a
five
number of
times.
breaths? Yeah, 5 times. Okay. Yeah. That's what I
So
was going to
I
ask. Like, give me
pick
the
five
rules.
because it's like
Yeah.
enough to kind of feel it,
Yeah.
and not so much that it's a huge commitment. Or say the kids are jumping in the car and you're like, we're going to sing at the top of our lungs to a really loud song, like put on the
Yeah.
music and like let that energy out. Um,
Yeah.
Singing is a great one, to, yes, like release energy, but also the vagus nerve,
Mhm.
connected to all of the things. Singing
Yeah.
and humming tone the vagus nerve, and so that's also.
Really?
Hmm. Hmm.
Yes,
Humming is a great, yeah.
I'm obsessed with the vagus nerve, the gut brain
Hmm.
connection. Everyone on the
Hmm.
podcast knows that I love gut health, and the
Hmm.
fact that like your nutrition and what you put into
Hmm.
your gut has so much to do with your feelings
Hmm.
of anxiousness and
Hmm.
whatnot.
Hmm.
But it's about having all of the tools, right? And being
Hmm.
equipped with all of the tools. And I'm an
Hmm.
engineer, so I'm a nerd. So I like the math. I like the
Yep.
math of, okay, it's
Hmm.
5. I need to do 5 because then I
Yeah.
want to sit there and make sure that I'm
Hmm.
getting them. And in you, if
Hmm.
we go back to the breathing, is there like scientific research around like how long you breathe in versus how long you breathe, you know what I mean? You
Yeah.
exhale, the ratios of those 2 things. Can you speak to that a little bit deeper?
Sure. On a very kind of like quick tip, no matter what kind of breathing you're doing, if
Yeah.
it's to regulate and calm you, which I'm assuming is, what we're talking about in all of these circumstances, just make sure your exhale is longer than the inhale.
I love it.
Um, that's it. And
I
that's what
love it.
I like. We don't have to overcomplicate it. We don't have to breathe in for this many seconds and out. You can, if you're really into
Yeah.
breath work or you find something that really works for you,
Yeah.
great. But it's really exhales longer than the inhale. Um, and, a lot of what we're talking about also is just experimenting. And I wish
Mhm.
that I could give a 1, 2, 3 step protocol to calming your nervous system in that moment. But the truth is that
Yeah.
what is going to work for me is not going to work for you.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so here are some ways to mobilize, but it can be, maybe fun is a little bit of a reach, but it can be interesting. It can be
Yeah.
interesting to play around with and see, oh, when I like busted out this song with my
Yeah.
kids, I actually arrived to wherever we were going and like I felt better. I felt less
Yeah.
anxious.
Yeah.
Or when I, just let out like a primal scream in the car on the way because I'm so
Yeah.
stressed that I'm late and I'm sitting in this line. Oh, yeah, I felt a little bit of that energy move. I'm a little more present. So it's really, I just encourage so much experimenting and consistency there because it can be so easy to say, well, I tried this thing and it didn't work.
Mhm.
So
Oh my
here I
gosh,
am
yeah,
feeling this
yes,
forever.
yes, oh my gosh, you are, like, preaching to the choir. I It is just a huge pet peeve of mine for any tool or strategy to say, "Well, I tried that and it didn't work."
Mhm.
Well, that's and it is, like, a huge focus of this
Mhm.
podcast
Mm.
and my heart to share as many tools and strategies
Mhm.
as we can find
Mhm.
so that you can grasp to the ones that
Mhm.
work for
Mhm.
you.
Mhm.
And when I was living in fight or flight, I was there for 5 years
Mhm.
before I learned about the gut brain connection and the vagus nerve. I had no idea what the vagus nerve was. And I
Yeah.
learned the power of like strain specific probiotics and all of the
Mhm.
things that was the catalyst to me leaning in to a lot of the rest of the tools that we talk
Mhm.
about. But
Mhm.
I wish that I had known breathing techniques or
Mhm.
counting to, well, not even counting to 5, but just breathing techniques and
Mhm.
other
Mhm.
the things that you share.
Yeah, the grounding and the body
The
based.
Yeah,
Yeah.
because otherwise you end up beating yourself up because you
Mhm.
can't handle the stress of it,
Mhm.
which puts you
Mhm.
on a spiral downward, which is
Mhm.
what you're on a mission to change and I am
Mhm.
on a mission to change, and I
Mhm.
absolutely love that. So for us to simultaneously grow and grieve,
Mhm.
one requires rest to heal and
Mhm.
one requires action to rebuild. What is your strategy for really embarking upon that?
It depends on where you're at. Are you early days of grief? Has it been some time?
Yeah.
That's really going to influence your capacity. And
Mhm.
so, really, all we're talking about is capacity and this energy to rest and energy to rebuild, the healing and the moving forward. I think making those distinctions is really important because, speaking to your point, it is so easy for us to beat ourselves up for where we are in this moment. And
Mhm.
oh my gosh, the amount of times that I've spoken with clients who are, whether it's a day or an hour
Mm.
of, I wasn't thinking about the person that I lost, or I was, but I was just kind of numb and checked out and I was just moving through the day. Oh my God, what does that mean about me that I'm not still on the floor,
Yeah.
sobbing? Or say you are on the floor and you can't get out of bed and then you're like, oh my gosh, like, am I not strong enough? Why am I not able to do
Yeah.
XYZ? I think this is speaking to such a larger cultural problem that anyone
Mhm.
in the grief space is very aware of. The lack of education. We are told loss is a singular event. You move through it, you go on, and you live the rest of your life. It's just this
Mhm.
like boop, speed bump. And it's
Mhm.
like, no, it's a complete reorienting of everything: sense of
Yeah.
self, family dynamics, your safety in the world, routine, consistency, all of it. And so So I like to name those two pieces that you need both of those,
Yeah.
the rest and the moving forward, the moving with,
Mhm.
the rebuilding, but you can't do those simultaneously. Most
Yeah.
often, you are ping ponging between the two. So I always like to use the visual of you're going to ping pong and zigzag in a very gentle upward trajectory,
Yeah.
but you're bouncing between the two. And so when you're in one, trust that you will be back in the other one eventually. You don't
Yeah.
have to make yourself wrong for where you are there.
That's such a good point, is that you don't have to make yourself wrong. And I
Mhm.
think raising awareness, I love the work that you're doing to raise awareness around grief, because 100% when my husband died, I looked at what would be my grief journey
Mhm.
almost like getting a college degree. Like,
Mhm.
well, I'm in grief 101, and then I'm going to get to
Mhm.
201, and then I'm going to get to
Mhm.
301, and then I'm going to
Mhm.
graduate, and then I'm going to
Mhm.
be amazing, and life's going
Yeah.
to go back to
Yeah.
whatever. Or I
Mhm.
learned this phrase after Jason died, your new normal. Like, oh, are you
Mhm.
adjusting to your new normal? And I
Mhm.
literally wanted to poke someone in the eyeballs when they said my new
Yeah.
normal. I was
Mhm.
like, this is not something that I asked for. This is
Yeah.
not something that I know how
Mhm.
to navigate.
Yeah. Yeah.
And this is something that it's not a 4-year degree. It's a,
Mhm.
like you just mentioned this, it is a complete new life. It's a
Mhm.
complete new identity that you have
Mhm.
to create for
Mhm.
yourself, and a
Mhm.
new life that you have to build.
Mhm. Exactly. And I think that the idea and concept of there being a timeline, I mean, I have not spoken to one griever in the years I've been doing this work that has ever said that they felt better after 6 weeks or
Right.
6 months. But that is quite literally the messaging that we are given everywhere. And so,
Hmm.
of course, and I experience this myself all the time, and especially in those first couple years where I just wrote about this the other day, but I remember feeling like I am an alien playing the role of Rio. I don't
Hmm.
fit in my life anymore. Everything
Hmm.
looks the same, and I know I'm supposed to act like I
Hmm.
like myself, whatever that means now, but
But I don't
there's
fit. You
I
don't
don't
fit.
fit. No. And all of these pieces are different, but they all look the same. So there's all of these invisible layers that we
Yeah.
are navigating that aren't obvious to other
Yeah.
people.
I
And
think
and
that's
it
such a
just
great way to
yeah.
put it. They're invisible.
Mhm.
And I remember in the years after Jason died, like researching grief and researching, the trajectories of, like, here are the 7 stages of grief or the 9 stages of grief, or
Mhm.
there's so many charts out there. You could come up with however many stages you want. But
Mhm.
in the charts that I found while I was actively looking for help, it
Mhm.
was, well, you should be in this phase for so many months. And then you should be in this phase for so many months. And then you should be in this phase. And I was like, oh my gosh, I'm like 5 years into this and I'm still
Yeah.
in like phase 2. Like, I'm a
Yeah.
loser. Like, I'm a
Yeah.
total loser. And
Mhm.
so what would you say? Like, how can we help
It makes me
this
so mad. It makes me so the charts and the stages. If there's one thing we can all throw away right now, it's the idea that there are any stages. I mean,
Yeah.
what a silly concept when you think about it. And the stages of grief by I think it's Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, like that was originally written for terminal patients. That was written for the
Yeah.
person dying, of the
Yeah.
stages that they move through. And of course it got, adopted and misinterpreted, and now it's just a way for someone grieving to feel shameful
Bad.
and awful and judged
Yes.
about what they're experiencing. And so the stages have yeah, if there's one thing we can just do away with immediately, it's
Perfect.
that there are
Perfect. You're
any
lighting that on
shoulds,
fire.
and we are lighting it on fire.
We are lighting that
Yes.
on fire. The should, you should do, you could do.
Mhm.
I've done episodes about that, because
Mhm.
also I felt the weight and judgment. And I know that
Yeah.
if you are grieving anything right
Mhm.
now, if you're in a
Mhm.
season of grief, like, you
Mhm.
feel this heavy weight of what
Mhm.
other people think that you should be doing. And
Mhm.
I love that you've shared once, like, when society tries to support a griever, it's okay
Mhm.
to feel all of your feelings, but
Mhm.
please do it privately.
Yes.
It's
Yes.
okay to have hard days, just as long as we can't tell. That's all I'm saying.
Mhm.
Like, it's
Mhm.
important to
Mhm.
remember and carry them in your heart, just
Mm.
not too loud and not
Yeah,
that makes me feel uncomfortable because
exactly.
I'm over here trying to have a good time.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
you're over here talking about your dead father.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, what
Mhm.
encouragement do you have for the listener that is like,
Mhm.
"Oh, well, how can I better
Mhm.
support a
Mhm.
griever in my life?"
Mhm. Yeah, I think, yeah, two pieces. I think for the griever who is feeling all of that societal pressure and those
Yeah.
expectations and all of that mixed messaging, where it's
Yeah.
like, oh my gosh, of course, how are you? We're here for you. Let us know if you need anything. And then
Yeah.
crickets.
Yeah.
For that person, find your safe spaces. If you don't have it, find it. Make that
Yeah.
effort, whether it's a support group or a therapist or a coach. Find the community that gets it. Huge. That's huge. We have to
Yeah.
feel like we belong. We are social creatures. We are meant to be a part of
Yeah.
a group and
Something.
to be in connection with others. And so if the connections you did have and do have aren't fitting anymore, go find the ones that do.
And
Um,
how would you do that?
mhm.
So, if you don't have a community, do you
Mhm.
have action steps for how you would go find one or even a therapist? Like, if you're
Mhm.
looking for a specific therapist, like,
Mhm.
how do you go about doing that in a constructive fashion?
I think that when it comes to community, social media, surprisingly to me, has been a really effective way to
Yeah.
connect people. And I have a lot of people that I'm in communication with, on Instagram, and they'll say, we'll be chatting and they'll say, I'm looking for a group of widows. And I'm like, I
Mhm.
got you. I know of
Mhm.
three that are
Yeah.
happening and starting at this time. And so going on Instagram, seeing,
Yeah.
are there certain grief experts that you really connect with or that you really like their messaging or the way they speak about it?
Yeah.
In terms of finding a therapist, this is a conversation in its own. I have some thoughts about therapists and grief, but you can definitely search through Psychology Today, grief specialties or bereavement, and reaching out to, do you have a local hospice, foundation? Like, what are the resources in your community where you can call
Yeah.
them and say, do you have references or
Yeah.
referrals?
Yeah.
Um,
I remember going to the
mhm,
hospice. I went to hospice myself
mhm,
and I did not fit in. I
mhm,
did not, and
mhm,
so I fumbled
mhm,
for years to find the people,
mhm,
the right people, and Instagram was just getting started
mhm.
when my husband died. So it
Yeah.
wasn't the resource that it is now, but I
Mhm.
love the resource that it is.
Yeah.
That's how you and I met.
Yeah. Yeah.
I love it
Mhm.
because you feel so connected
Mhm.
because you do have like-minded
Mhm.
feelings,
Mhm.
thoughts,
Mhm.
outlooks.
Yeah. And that's the beauty. I mean, I think there's so much wrong with social media,
Yeah.
but that's also the beauty of it, is that you just have access to people who you may
Yeah.
have never met before or had the opportunity to cross paths with. And all of a sudden, that opportunity to connect with people who understand you and who are sharing the same experience, who can
Yeah.
offer a sense of belonging and safety. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's available, and that's really cool. Very
Yeah,
special,
and
I
that's
think.
up to you
Mhm.
listening to actively search. So obviously you should be friends with me on Instagram. Obviously you should be friends with Rio on Instagram,
Mhm.
but
Mhm.
also actively searching
Yeah.
and unfollowing the people that are not serving you a purpose. Like back to
Yes.
what we were talking about
Yeah.
earlier. Like if you
Mhm.
were friends with certain people for a season, it is okay to hit the unfollow button and move
Mhm.
forward so that you
Mhm.
can create and maintain
Mhm.
your
Mhm.
safe space.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
and I interrupted our original conversation, but in the having two, breaking this up into two things, like how do you support the person grieving?
Mhm.
And then how would you support, what words of encouragement do you have for the friend
Mhm.
that
Mhm.
has a really good friend who just lost a loved one? How can they step in to not being on this list of it's okay to feel your feelings, but please do it privately. It's okay
Yeah.
to have hard days, but just, I'm over
Mhm.
here trying to have a good time. So don't,
Yeah.
don't ruin my happy hour.
Yes,
Like
yes.
how can we encourage
Mhm.
her to show up better?
Mhm. I would say that, and I'm truly speaking from experience of being on the other side of this as well. Before my loss, I had
Mhm.
a close, very dear friend of mine go through her own significant loss, and she was leaning on me. She was trying to lean on me. And in retrospect, oh my God, I did not show up for her in the ways that she needed to because I didn't know. And so, what I just want to offer there is that you will say the wrong thing. For anyone
Yeah.
who's supporting a griever, just know you're going to mess up, but
Yeah.
that's okay. It matters. It does not matter exactly what you say as it does, as much as it matters that you keep trying to be there,
Mhm.
keep trying to show up. And maybe you invite them to three things in a row, the person grieving, and they don't show up, or they say they're going to
Yeah.
go and then they decline. Don't take that personally. It's not about
Yes.
you. They're,
Yeah.
like you spoke about earlier, they are in survival.
Yeah.
They maybe are afraid that if they don't accept the invitation that you'll stop inviting them to things.
Yeah.
They're afraid of being disconnected from you, but they also don't have the internal capacity to
Yeah.
socialize, to do small talk, to whatever the thing is.
That is so
Yeah.
good. Because I had already mentioned that I was that
Yeah.
woman. Like,
Mhm.
you invited me and I said
I was too.
yes,
Yeah.
and then I didn't show
Mhm.
up, and then
Mhm.
now everybody's making fun of me because they're like, "Oh, you can invite Dana, but she's not gonna show up." And
Mhm.
I'm like, "Okay, I don't really wanna
Yeah.
be that person."
Yeah.
But at the same time, I'm struggling to keep it all
Mhm.
together.
Mhm.
And I think another thing that is really worth mentioning is asking for help. I didn't
Yeah.
know how to ask for help.
Yeah.
I felt
Me
like
either.
yeah, I
Mhm.
felt like, well, I should be able to handle all of this. Like, I,
Mhm.
I should be
Mhm.
able to do it. And
Mhm.
the grief chart told me that I should already be done. Like,
Yeah.
the grief chart told me that I should
Mhm.
I should be better than this. So
Mhm.
I am self-shaming, which is not
Mhm.
helping anyone or
Mhm.
anything,
Mhm.
and not showing up in the capacity that I wanted to. So I guess, like, how would you encourage us
Mhm.
to reach out? To
Mhm.
have the confidence to say, "This is what I need." I
Mhm.
didn't even and I'm positive if you're new to grief and you're listening to this,
Mhm.
I had no idea what I needed.
Mhm, mhm. I have a whole guide with scripts on how to ask for help that I'll send you if you want to link
Ooh,
that. And
yes,
this
and
is
we'll put it in the show notes. Yes, okay,
one
this
of
is
my
amazing.
favorite topics because I too, I'm the classic eldest daughter archetype.
Yeah, same, me
I,
too. That's why we're best friends. Me
yep,
too,
yep.
same.
Yep, you're everyone's go to. You're the
Yeah,
strong one. You're the one with all the answers. And it can be so disorienting when
yeah,
suddenly you're needing help, but you maybe have never had to ask for this kind of help before or
yeah,
anything even close to it. And so then people continue to believe that you got it because you're not saying otherwise. And then you continue to suffer because
yeah.
you don't have any help or you don't feel emotionally supported. So it's this
Oh my gosh, are you, like,
horrible.
in my life? Are you in are you in my head right now? Like,
Yeah.
this is exactly
Mhm.
what I felt like.
Mhm. Yeah, me too. Me too. And I think one of the most helpful well, I will say for me, one of the most
Yeah.
helpful places to start, as we are talking about that specific piece of not showing up to things or not having the
Mhm.
capacity, is to say something like, I am not sure if I'm going to be able to show up to things. I keep being surprised at what I'm not up for, or when I am
Yeah.
up for something, it changes day to day. So, dear friend, please know I really I don't want you to stop inviting me because
Yeah.
you think that I don't want to be with you. I do. I just don't know how to do all of it right now. So please keep inviting me. I may or
Oh,
may not come, but please, please, please keep inviting me. And so I think there
that's
are
amazing.
ways that we can say, hey, this is where I'm at. Do you accept that? Do you consent to just this is our dynamic right now? Typically, the people who really love us and like do want to try, whether they're saying the right things or not,
Mhm.
they'll see that and go, oh, okay, yeah, that's actually a
Yeah.
relief for me to hear because I thought you were getting
Yeah.
sick of me asking.
Yeah.
Yeah. Hmm.
I wish that I would have had that advice back then. I think
Hmm.
that I would have been able to verbalize that, to say,
Hmm.
I really would like to come.
Hmm.
I'm a big maybe.
Mhm.
rather than saying yes, because I feel like if I don't say yes, you're not going to invite me again. And I really
Mhm.
desperately want to be
Mhm.
included and invited,
Mhm.
especially I feel like if your husband dies or your spouse dies and you're used to doing couples things and all of a sudden
Yeah,
now you're excluded right out of the gate because you don't have a plus one. And that's a whole nother
that's
story
a
for another
whole
day.
yep, yep,
But
yep.
but just in saying I really appreciate you offering. I really
Mhm.
appreciate you inviting me,
Mhm.
and I will try to
Yeah.
be there. But please keep I think it's key to share, like, please keep inviting me, and that does
Mhm.
probably take the burden off of the person
It
that's
does.
asking you.
Yeah. And I always like to like good rule of thumb in terms of navigating relationships after loss, where it feels safe. Like that's a huge asterisk there. Where it feels
Mhm.
safe, make the implicit explicit. We are really good at just assuming that someone knows where we're coming from or how we feel about them. And yes, that's a vulnerable thing to do when you're grieving to say, "Hey, I just want you to know that I am afraid that I'm burdening you when I'm speaking about my person.
Mhm.
Is it okay that I talk about them? Or would you, join me on a walk? I don't really feel like talking. Is that okay? I want to be in your presence, but I don't want to do the
Yeah.
processing." And so, what are the ways, where are the safe places where we can be more explicit?
Yeah.
I
I
think
love
that can
that.
be.
I think
Mhm.
you can do an audible book also. If you have a friend that you're like, I would like to go on a walk, but I don't really want to talk. Do you want
Yeah,
to listen to the same book?
I
And we'll
love that.
start on chapter one and we'll walk
Yeah.
and not talk,
Hmm.
but be in one another's presence.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
well, the holiday season is here. I would
Hmm.
love to know, how do you keep the memory of your dad alive
Hmm.
during
Hmm.
this season? This holidays are tough.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
grief gets amplified in this
Hmm.
season in
Hmm.
ways that feel almost inescapable.
Yeah.
And all of the triggers, the ads, the foods, the
Hmm.
absence. I remember like crying in the bathroom because I would see families that were intact, mom,
Yeah.
dad, children,
Yeah.
and then it's me with my children and
Mhm.
I couldn't handle it.
Mhm.
So,
Mhm.
how do you I guess I've asked you like 17 questions, but let's let's
No, it's a
unpack all of
good
them.
yeah, yeah. So, removing the things that are triggers for you is a big one. And that's
Mhm.
something that I do a lot in my work with clients is let's identify and get really intentional about what are these hardest pieces for you
Yeah.
and how do we navigate that. And that might be I'm deleting social media until the new year. I cannot look at all of these families or the happy couples or the moms and their babies. If you're in the baby loss community, there's so much that's in your face right now on
Yeah.
top of everything that you're navigating. And so maybe that's, yeah, I'll hang out on Substack and I'll read beautiful poetry and I'll stay connected in that way. But in terms of like these family photos, I can't take it. I have
Yeah.
to get off.
Yeah.
So giving yourself again that full permission to just be where you are and not make yourself wrong for that and prioritize what do I need to survive this season with as least suffering as possible.
Yeah.
In terms of integrating our loved ones, I think that that's a really big conversation during this time. I think a lot of
Mhm.
people don't know how to do that, or there can be this, well, I don't want to bring sadness into the day. Like I want it to be joyful. And so
Yeah.
sometimes I'll be speaking with clients and say, it's because you're sad and you're acknowledging their absence. That doesn't mean that joy and gratitude can't also be sitting
Mhm.
right alongside that.
Mhm.
And okay, if you cry, because you are intentionally thinking of them or lighting a candle or setting a place setting for them at the table or watching home videos with them in it,
Yeah.
for 30 minutes with your kids before you open presents, like whatever the ritual or tradition, the new tradition is that allows you to feel connected to them. It's okay
Yeah.
that that brings up grief. Grief doesn't not belong here. And so for me, you asked me what I do.
Yeah.
I'm a big fan of letter writing. Something that I know helps me feel really connected to my dad is writing to him as if I were speaking to him now. And so I'll,
Yeah.
make sure that on Thanksgiving Day or maybe the days leading up to it, during Christmas, all the things, I'll just say like, "Hey dad, this is what we're doing today. I wish you were here. I remember the time you did this, this, and this. I'm going to miss so much,
Yeah.
setting up the tree with you and just allowing myself to be in that.
Mhm.
When we create space for it, it lowers all of the anxiety around the I can't acknowledge how devastated
Yeah.
I am because I'm in a season of cheer. And so I'll
Yeah.
say that it's important to be intentional with creating that space to remember and to bring them into the day or the season with you, however feels
I
good
love
for
that so
you.
much. I love that so much. Just being intentional about what
Mhm,
you're doing, because
mhm,
if you try to set the grief to the side
mhm,
and say, "Well, I will deal with this later," and
mhm,
because we're in a happy season and I need to be
mhm,
happy, it's only
mhm,
going to grow bigger and bigger
mhm,
and bigger to
mhm,
this elephant or the beach ball that you can no longer stuff under the water, because
mhm,
it's going to come up and smack you in the face. So
mhm,
being intentional about what you're doing. And I think over the years, I have learned to recognize that
mhm,
in the days leading up to Thanksgiving, in the
mhm,
days leading up to your birthday, in the days
mhm.
leading up to Christmas, like I get angsty, and
Same.
recognizing
Mhm,
that in your body, like
mhm, mhm,
I get angsty. And for years, I just press through. We have no
mhm,
time. I have no time to do. I don't know what this is. Like I can
mhm,
recognize I'm a little bit more on edge. I'm a little bit
mhm,
cranky. I'm a little bit whatever.
mhm,
But now you can see the train coming into the
mhm,
station.
mhm,
And
mhm.
so
Yeah.
for the woman listening that's like,
Mhm,
"Oh my gosh, I haven't connected the dots," or maybe you've
mhm.
just recently connected the dots to say, "There's an event coming up," and I think the holidays are just a huge, huge, huge
Yeah,
trigger.
yeah.
And as the days grow closer, you can feel that in your body. So
Mhm,
do we use the same tools and strategies that we were using in the car while we were late for
mhm.
pickup? Like what is the coaching that you would give us to help our bodies manage that better?
And I love that you say our bodies because there's nothing wrong happening here when you're feeling that angst,
Yeah.
leading up. It's just your body is remembering and it's processing, and grief is, kind of just chronic stress, and your
Yeah.
stress levels are going to be high when you're triggered and when there's all of these grief reminders.
Mhm.
And so on a physical level, does walking tend to ground you? Do you feel better after you just rage walk for like an hour? Or do you feel better when
I
you
love it.
just,
Rage walk. I
yeah,
love a good
rage
fast
walk?
walk. Like
Yes.
let's rage walk. Let's
I
rage.
love rage walk. I love rage on the page. Do you feel better when you just like,
Yeah.
unfiltered, just type out every single thing you're feeling and then delete it because the point is just to get it out? And so
Yeah.
again, it's sort
I
of,
like to rage clean. Is that a thing?
sure, that's energy. Yeah. Yeah. Um,
Oh,
and so
yeah.
I'll say, are there certain things that work for you?
Yeah.
Implement those, like be intentional about implementing those way more than you think you need to in the days leading up. Often the anticipation of the event
Yeah.
is more challenging sometimes than the actual event
Mhm.
itself. So just know, like, I'm heightened. There's nothing wrong with that. It makes perfect sense. And
Yeah.
what are the things I can implement in my day now to just make space for the stress, make space for some grounding? Yeah, just dancing. Do I need to just wake up every morning and turn on my favorite playlist and just
Yeah.
dance for 5 minutes?
Yeah.
How do I feel after that? Yeah.
I love
Hmm.
that. And I also like for the person that is grieving or has someone that is grieving that's coming to Thanksgiving dinner, for
Hmm.
example, and you're
Hmm.
thinking to yourself, do I talk about this person? Do I not talk about this person? Like if
Hmm.
you were coming to my house for Thanksgiving dinner, I think the first thing that I would say is, Rio, what was your dad's name?
Hmm. Hmm.
Like what was it? What was his name? What was his name?
Peter.
Pete.
Hmm.
What did Peter do?
He owned his own company. He was an entrepreneur, and he resurfaced and built tennis courts.
Oh, I love that. That's so
Hmm.
fun and very
Yeah.
niche. But
Hmm.
yes, like
Hmm.
as we go through the holidays,
Hmm.
asking someone about their loved one and
Yeah.
giving them the space to say, this was his favorite food. Like, what was
Hmm.
Pete's favorite Thanksgiving meal? What was his favorite
Hmm.
side dish? Like,
Hmm.
holding space
Hmm.
for that conversation, I think
Hmm.
is one, if you're grieving, allowing yourself, it's, you need to keep their memory alive for
Yeah.
your heart.
Yeah. Yeah. It
And
actually
giving your
helps you.
yes,
Mhm.
it
Mhm.
helps you to grow through that
Mhm.
grief. And if
Mhm.
you are the friend, the
Mhm.
family member,
Mhm.
leaning in to
Yeah.
that conversation, especially at the holidays, to
Mhm.
ask that person that you know is so terribly missing their
Mhm.
person, to
Mhm.
ask them about them, or like,
Mhm.
and make it a pointed question. Like,
Yeah.
what was the favorite present that your dad
Mhm.
ever has given you? Do you have one?
Mhm. Mhm. That's a good question. I have a favorite memory of um, a Christmas day where we did a hike through Joshua Tree, and we just had
Yeah.
the best, most magical conversation ever about um, just like spirituality and the universe and how connected everything feels. And he and I have had a bunch of encounters throughout my life that have just been too big of a coincidence to not be something. And like, so we
Yeah.
just really shared in that like magic of the world. So
Yeah.
that conversation is one of my favorite memories.
I
Yeah.
love it. I love
And
it.
you
And
can
if you,
see how much I'm smiling. And so I love the
yes,
point that you're making.
I was just
Yeah.
going to mention that you are
Yeah.
beaming. If you're not
Mhm.
watching with us on YouTube, you are beaming from ear to ear.
Yeah.
And I mean, the nerdy part is it lowers cortisol, it lowers your stress
Mhm.
response,
Mhm.
the puts you into that
Mhm.
parasympathetic nervous state, and
Mhm.
also allows you to heal. And we can have, or helps you to heal,
Mhm.
and
Mhm.
we can have this fun conversation. And this is not ruining the mojo of Thanksgiving dinner.
No.
Like, it's fun,
And
and
that's what
we're
I like love to say too is that you're not I love how you're saying, if you're supporting a griever or you're hosting someone and grief is their plus one,
yeah,
yeah, lean into it, give space to it. You are not reminding them of
right.
something that they've forgotten. Like
They haven't forgotten. Like,
I promise you, I'm thinking about him right now. And so you asking me about him makes
yeah,
me actually feel very seen and very um, understood. I feel like you are allowing me the space to honor my person. And so
yeah,
I think so many people are really afraid to offend or make someone upset. And
yeah,
what I always like to offer there is you will know if someone doesn't want to talk about it, but make space for it anyways. Like
yeah,
it's okay if you
yeah,
say, "Hey, what was his favorite dish?" or "Tell me about him." And I go, I'm like, "Oh, it was this, but I want to focus on something else." Like if someone
yeah.
grieving says that, that's fine.
Yeah.
And so it's like you can't mess up by
No, you can't
making room
mess
for
up.
it.
You can't mess up, but I do think that
Mhm.
it is much easier to ask a simple question or
Mhm.
to spark a
Mhm.
conversation around a memory than to open with the huge umbrella of, well, how are you really?
Yeah.
So
How are you?
Rio, tell me, how are you really?
Yeah.
Then you're like, oh man, like I
Yeah.
don't know how to answer that. Like, what are we talking about? And
Yeah.
now I feel like that question
Mhm.
can trigger, and
Mhm.
it's just heavy.
Mhm.
So
Yeah.
giving the person that's grieving space to just say something uplifting about
Mhm.
their plus one
Mhm.
that
Mhm.
they're already
Mhm.
carrying in their heart,
Mhm.
it just
Mhm.
helps everyone. Oh my
Yeah.
gosh, I could talk with
I love
you
that.
for hours about all of the things, but if we want to work
Yes.
with you,
Mhm.
first of all, we are going to go follow you at And That's Grief on
Yes.
Instagram, and we're all going to
Yes.
be friends. And how can we work with you?
Yeah. So you can work with me one to one. I'll have a group already in progress by the time this comes out. I am planning to offer more groups in 2025. So a good way
Get
to
on the
stay
wait
in
list.
touch. Yeah, get on the wait list.
Get on the
A
wait
good way
list.
to stay in touch is through Instagram. If you are interested in somatic psychotherapy around grief, I offer that to residents in California. And then I offer grief support coaching to anyone outside of California. So,
I love
so you
that.
can get in touch with me via Instagram, or I have a weekly newsletter that just does like a total deep dive on one area each week. And it's called Touching the Fire on Substack. So you can find me there as well. And I'll have all of
I love
the
that. And I will have all
group
of the
stuff.
links in the show notes for the email
Perfect.
newsletter and for the free downloadable that we are all going to go
Yes, I
run
will
and
send that to you.
download.
Yes.
Yes, we will all
Mhm.
grab that for tools and
Mhm.
strategies
Mhm.
to help someone
Mhm.
that is
Mhm.
grieving. And if it's you helping
Mhm.
yourself, you
Mhm.
the world needs the best version of you. And we all
Mhm.
need tools and
Mhm.
strategies to show up
Mhm.
as her. So
Mhm.
thank you so
Yes.
much for being here, Rio. I
Thanks so
cannot
much for
wait to chat
having
with
me.
you next time.
Yeah, this
But
was
yeah,
so lovely. Thank
yeah,
you.
thank you.